Hi everyone, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Jess in Romancelandia, where I talk about romance books and happily ever afters and all of that lovely deliciousness. Today I am slightly late to the game as per, but I'm bringing you a video that I'm super excited about, which is my review of the 8-part period drama Bridgerton, which was produced by Shondaland and Netflix and is based on a series of historical romance novels by Juliet Quinn. I have been so excited for this TV show to come out for literally over a year now. Some weird background context. I spent most of 2019 and then a bit of 2020 before it all went bad working in Madrid on my year abroad for a magazine that wrote a lot of articles about television and film, and one of the first articles that I was tasked with writing was a piece on period dramas. So the Downton Abbey film had just come out and my bosses wanted me to write something about period dramas on the small and large screens that had already come out and ones that were in production. And that was how I discovered that a series of books that I had read and loved, which was the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn, were going to be brought to the screen by Netflix and Shondaland, and then I made my entire workplace think I was an absolute freak because I just started screaming my tiny little nerd heart out in the middle of the office. But yeah, that was back in September 2019, so I have been obsessively tracking the TV show on social media and online ever since then, so you can imagine my excitement when I sat down on Christmas Day to watch the first episode. Something that really delights my little romance reader heart though is that Bridgerton seems to have really been embraced beyond those people that just read the book. The show has been #1 trending in the UK since it came out and in several other countries as well, I believe. I think on Christmas Day a bunch of people just sat down and thought, well, here's a nice looking period drama we can watch with grandma, only to find themselves 4 hours later watching some sort of sex marathon montage to a classical cover of Taylor Swift. I'm just envisioning like the horrified faces of families that sat down to watch Bridgerton together as they quickly realised that this was not your nana's Jane Austen. So the audience success with the show has made me really hopeful that we'll see more seasons of Bridgerton in the future, especially because from what I understand, Bridgerton is actually part of a very lucrative deal between Shondaland and Netflix, so I do think there will be the funding there, and now that it's clearly found its home amongst viewers, I've got my fingers crossed that we'll be seeing like Anthony's story and Colin's story and Benedict's story in the years to come. So I thought before we get any news on the future of the show, it would be a really good idea to get my views on the first season out there. I've decided to split this review into kind of 3 rough sections, so things I liked, things I wasn't so keen on, and then a little spoilery section on the end for people that have seen the entirety of the show. I will leave timestamps in the down bar down below, so if you guys want to skip to any of those sections or just avoid any of them, you can do so. But before I get into the things I like, I thought I would give you a brief synopsis of the series for those that haven't started it. So Bridgerton is set in 1813 London during the social season and follows Daphne Bridgerton, who is the 4th child and eldest daughter of the esteemed Bridgerton clan. Daphne is quickly declared to be the diamond of the first water, or the hit of the season, by Queen Charlotte, so she's anticipating that she'll have several marriage offers waiting for her as she enters into society, but she's pretty horrified to discover that the overprotectiveness of her brother means that there aren't that many suitors that are brave enough to come up and try and court her. Daphne is very determined to be successful in society. She knows how harshly she will be judged as a woman if she is not, and she also knows that as the eldest girl, as the first to marry, she really needs to sort of set the tone so that her younger siblings can also enjoy success when it's their turn to be launched into society. So as to achieve this, Daphne and her eldest brother's friend, Simon Bassett, the newly titled Duke of Hastings, decide to devise a fake dating plot by which they will pretend to court so as to attract more suitors for Daphne and so as to repel the several meddling mamas that are trying to get Simon to show an interest in their own daughters. Over time, however, their little scheme gets more complicated as they begin to develop feelings for each other despite Daphne's eagerness to marry and to have a family, and Simon's vow that he will never marry and never sire children. Overall, Bridgerton is a fun and vibrant, sexy romp of a show that really feels like the Regency has come crashing into the 21st century. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's something that you have to have loved other Regency adaptations to enjoy, because like I said, it definitely does have a modern feel to it, which is kind of aided by the fact that there are so many well-known romance tropes in it, from your fake dating to your older brother's best friend. But now you know a little bit about the show, I will get into describing some of the things that I really liked about it. So first up, I have to talk about the setting and overall design of Bridgerton. Right from the very first shot of Grosvenor Square, I knew that this show was just going to be so aesthetically pleasing. I spoke a little bit in my trailer reaction about how much I adored the vibrancy and the colour that Bridgerton brought to the screen. I feel like in a lot of period dramas they go for very muted colour palettes. If you think of like the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, which is one of my favourite films of all time, it's not the most vibrant film. There's a lot of very like muted pastels, very earthy tones, and that's great and that works for that, but I don't think it's necessarily the most representative of the Regency as an era. For those of you who don't know, the Regency was kind of focused on a period of years between 1811 and 1820 whereby Prince George was serving as regent as his father was suffering from mental health issues that kind of had him declared unfit to rule, and it's a period of time that is associated with vibrancy and lavishness that was really kind of embodied by the regent himself. Whilst there were undeniable struggles amongst the working classes of society, it was an era in which the aristocracy were throwing these crazy parties, were just indulging in every aspect of the social scene, and I think it's really fun that Bridgerton has chosen to reflect that kind of colour and liveliness in this adaptation of the show. I think it's very underrepresented and is just so visually enjoyable to watch. I know some people had complaints about aspects of the design that they felt was historically inaccurate. One that I remember reading is that a lot of people were very annoyed about the corsets worn by the women, saying that they weren't historically accurate, and I don't refute that at all, but I would also say that it's not something that bothered me because I don't think that Bridgerton's priority is historical accuracy. And that's not slating the show, that's not slating Julia Quinn, that's just kind of my opinion when it comes to a lot of Regency romances. Many of the authors are dedicated to being as historically accurate as they possibly can, but it's also very worth acknowledging that a historical romance novel is not a historical novel. The romance is always going to be the kind of preeminent part of the plot, so historical accuracy isn't always going to be their first priority, and I think that's fine if you go into that without those expectations. I don't think Bridgerton is trying to say this is exactly how things were at all. I think they are very self-aware about the fact that their audience is a 21st century person, and that's kind of reflected in their priorities, which, like I said, I think lies with plot and characters and not the type of corset that the characters are wearing. Another thing that I adored and was not expecting at all was the soundtrack. Something really cool that Bridgerton has done, and that, like I said, makes me think that they were really creating the show with a 21st century viewer in mind, is that they blended your kind of classical compositions or orchestral compositions with modern orchestral covers of pop songs. I'm not a huge listener of classical music, I enjoy it, but I cannot distinguish between composers, so I got really excited in one of the first scenes when I recognised a piece of music playing in the background, and I was just sat there thinking, oh yeah, check me out with all of my classical music know-how, and then a little subtitle came up which revealed it was actually an orchestral cover of Ariana Grande's Thank You Next. So yeah, my dreams of being like a classical music gal were unfounded, but it was still really fun to listen to. I loved all of the covers that they included. They were just really tonally on point, like Thank You Next for Anthony turning down all of the suitors, Bad Guy by Billie Eilish for Anthony and Simon going up against Nigel. They were just such fun little like winks at the audience. I ended up really enjoying it. The next thing I want to talk about is the chemistry between the leads. So again, a bit of context. I love the Bridgerton books, but I have never really been a fan of The Duke and I, for some reasons that are too spoilery to get into now, but also because I just never really felt that Simon and Daphne were that great of a couple. I wasn't really convinced by their chemistry, but in the TV show I think Regé-Jean Page and Phoebe Dryburgh do an incredible job at really showing how Simon and Daphne's initial spark of attraction grows and develops and turns into friendship and then love. Some people have really criticised it and actually said that they didn't see it at all, but for me that scene when they're in the gallery together and their hands touch just embodied everything I love about the unresolved sexual tension of a period drama. In that era, men and women couldn't be alone together, really couldn't share a meaningful touch without risking censure or, you know, gossip coming at them from other people. And I think that these two actors do such a great job of showing the kind of tense, sexually charged atmosphere that that kind of environment creates. Their chemistry, their romance is the thing that is driving the series. So for me, if that hadn't been there, I don't think I would have been able to get through it, but they did an excellent job. Kind of leading on from this, the next thing that I loved was the cast. I thought that so many of the cast members did a really great job with bringing their book roles to life. Standouts for me were Claudia Jessie, who played Eloise, Regé-Jean Page, who played Simon, Adjoa Ando, who played Lady Danbury, and I also really loved the actor who played Anthony, whose name is just not coming to me right now. Jonathan Bailey. Jonathan Bailey plays Anthony Bridgerton. So those are kind of my four standouts, but honestly I felt like all of the cast did a really great job at keeping those sort of essences of the book characters that we know and love, whilst also adding their own little flair to it. There were some characters I'd like to see a little bit more from. So Colin, for example, in the books is this like very playful, larger than life character, and we did get a hint of that in the show, but I felt like with his storylines this season, with his screen time, we didn't really get the full force of it, and I would like to see more of that. I also really want to see more of Benedict Bridgerton. His character was a huge standout for me. I'm not a huge fan of Benedict in the books. I find him a little bit boring and whiny, but then this show just transforms him into this kind of like bohemian, liberal guy that I just want to follow on all his adventures. Another thing I adored was the big Bridgerton family. We didn't get quite as many big family scenes as I'd really like. They're always my favourite bits of the Bridgerton books, but we did have some scenes where you get the really fun sibling dynamics. The very first scene of the whole season where they're all getting ready for Daphne's presentation ceremony is lovely, and I also love the moments that we have between Benedict and Eloise as a fun little like rebellious black sheep of the family duo. I really hope to see more of them if we get some future seasons. But other than that, the final thing that I really want to mention that I adored in this season and this series is the emphasis on the female gaze. There is a lot of sex in Bridgerton, but at not one point did I feel as though they were shot in a way that like disparaged or objectified the female characters at all. If anything, desire in the series is really presented as directed towards men. It was men that had the kind of sweeping shots of their bodies. It was male backsides that we saw a whole lot of. And whilst that might be a weird thing to say that I enjoyed or I appreciated, I did, because romance is a female powered genre. I'm not saying that there are not readers and authors of other genders, because there very much are and they're very much welcome, but I do feel like romance gets a lot of shit because of how involved women are within it. And so I really like the fact that the way it was shot, the way it was portrayed, didn't in any way disparage the female perspective, and in fact it was told through that perspective, through that gaze. I thought that it was a very empowering and intelligent move, and I enjoyed it very much. Okay, so now sadly we are on to the things that I did not enjoy quite so much about the series. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of leading on from sex, and that is that I felt as though some of the sex scenes bordered on gratuitous throughout it. There is nothing wrong with gratuitous sex scenes in my opinion. If they want to put them in there, that's fine, but I did feel like there are a few montages that just kind of dragged on a little bit, and for an 8-episode series you can't have that much time taken away from actual plot driving action, in my opinion. It's not that I didn't think that the sex scenes weren't well shot, it's just that I felt like they could have been paced out a little bit better, or maybe kind of infused with more, you know, plot, just so that we would have still had a sense of the story moving on even as all of this sexy montage business is going down. The next thing that I didn't like kind of links back to that little pacing comment, and that is that I felt as though some of these storylines were weirdly paced or weighted. So one of the ones that comes to mind is that of Marina Thompson. A lot of people really didn't like Marina Thompson. I thought she was great. I get why people were annoyed by her actions, but I think she was just a woman trying to do what she had to do to survive, and I think her story was a very important one to tell. But I do think that the sort of pacing of her story was quite unusual. There were some episodes where we had loads of Marina, and then there was like another one where we just didn't have any. And again, when you're telling a story in so few episodes, you kind of want them to be paced better than that. I also found this with the story of Anthony and his relationship with his mistress, Sienna. That was very important at the beginning and again quite important at the end, but there was just this whole lump in the middle where it wasn't really spoken about that I found very weird. That's not me trying to say like, Shondaland, you did a crappy job. It's just me thinking with so few episodes, I think it needed to be kind of, you know, seamlessly plotted together, and I don't think it necessarily was. Speaking of things that didn't fit together quite so smoothly, I did feel like the dialogue was a little bit stilted at times. I mean, obviously I know that it is set in 1813, it's a different era, it's a different kind of cadence and register to their speech, but still there were some lines that were so awkwardly put together that I just found myself kind of thinking, what did you just say? Like, one that comes to mind for some reason is when Eloise calls up Daphne's name in the very first scene of the first episode and then turns to her brothers and goes, "Should you think she heard me?" in like a very posh way. And I'm not saying that's not how people would have spoke, but it's just, it doesn't quite sound smooth when it comes to like television, and that's not something that has to happen in all Regency dramas. I feel like Jane Austen adaptations do quite a good job of having you fully understand what's going on even when they're using those different registers, and it doesn't sound like completely out of place. So yeah, I definitely felt like the dialogue felt a little bit too obviously dated, if that makes sense, throughout this, and it kind of ended up taking me out of it sometimes rather than putting me in that era. Okay, so that is kind of all I can say about the series without spoilering you. Overall, I think I would grade this as either a B+ or an A- on the scale. I think that it is fun and vibrant and sexy and romantic, but I do think that there are some pacing issues and maybe some issues in terms of character development or certain character action choices that irritated me a little bit or rubbed me the wrong way. In general, I would really recommend this if you guys are looking for a form of just absolute escapism in what is quite a difficult start to the year. Honestly, in the beginning of 2021, I can't imagine a better TV show to escape into. You have your romance, you have your simpler, earlier era, you have your fun soundtracks, your conflicts, but you know that all of it is going to be resolved in the end. So I think that it is also a very reassuring show in that way, and it's one that I would recommend to viewers out there for that reason. Like I said though, that is kind of all I can talk about without giving away any spoilers for the episodes, so if you guys have not watched Bridgerton, feel free to go away and watch it and come back when you're ready to talk about a few of the more detailed aspects with me. Okay, so the first spoilery thing that I want to talk about is that scene, and I feel like if you guys have watched the TV show or read the books, you will know what I mean by that scene, because it is the one that has undoubtedly caused the most controversy between readers and viewers alike. Daphne discovers that Simon has been lying to her about his inability to have children, and that he can in fact sire children, he just chooses not to, and ensures that she doesn't get pregnant by pulling out of her at the moment of climax. Daphne is hurt and feels very betrayed by this, so she decides to essentially force herself on Simon during sex and make sure that he finishes inside of her. I was really quite annoyed that they kept it in the show. I honestly didn't think they were going to. I thought that they're remaking the show for a 21st century audience. We have so many more conversations around assault and consent now. It would be so much better if they just had it be the two of them get caught up in passion, Simon finishes inside her, and then in his panic reveals all to Daphne about why he didn't want to do that and why he didn't want her to get pregnant in the first place. That scenario still would have caused all the conflict. It still would have had Daphne feel like Simon was lying to her. It still would have had him resenting Daphne for potentially carrying the child that he didn't want, but it wouldn't have had any of this weird marital assault aspect to it that I just think is so unnecessary and honestly very damaging for some viewers. I do like that in the show they make it clear that kind of the crux of all of this is the utter lack of sex education and the ways that women were not really allowed to know about their own bodies. It's emphasised a lot in the books, but in the show from the beginning you have kind of all of the Bridgerton siblings, and then you also have Penelope from the Featherington side getting involved in the question of how does a woman have a baby? How does this come to be? And the education that they are given is so minimal, to the point of non-existent, that it kind of does make sense that Daphne is not taught about these issues of consent. But at the same time, I don't think this excuses her in any way. Even not knowing formally those kinds of words, that kind of vocabulary. She still should have known that forcing something on Simon that he did not want was completely out of line, completely immoral, honestly just a terrible, terrible thing to do to a person that you allegedly love. I just think it was a bad move on the part of Shondaland, and it just annoyed me because I really, really liked the attention they were giving to the lack of sex education. I actually thought the scene where Simon explains how Daphne can masturbate, whilst admittedly it was told in a kind of a weird way with him looming over her, I thought it was so empowering. Me and my friends were just like cheering in the background because a woman is never shown masturbating on screen, or if she is, it's kind of always done in a comedic way or through the male gaze. So I had really high hopes for how the series was going to deal with that scene, because I felt that it had already done an excellent job of talking around sex ed and women's ownership of their own bodies. But then they just went and let me down. So I was quite sad about that. That's kind of my main gripe with the series, to be honest. Another thing that kind of surprised me was that they revealed who Lady Whistledown was so early on. I guess it's not that early on in terms of the show. It happens in episode 8, which is the final episode. But in terms of the series, if you guys have read the books, as I have, you will know that they don't reveal that Penelope is Lady Whistledown until the 4th book, which is set 10 years after the events of The Duke and I, which is the first book on which the season is based. Even Julia Quinn, the author, didn't know when she was writing The Duke and I that Penelope was Lady Whistledown. She didn't know who Lady Whistledown was, full stop. So I was very surprised that they didn't decide to keep the viewer guessing a bit longer before they kind of threw back that hood and had Penelope smile all kind of sneakily at the camera. I guess maybe they were thinking, look, if we don't get another season, at least then viewers know and it's not this big unresolved mystery. But I would have quite liked to have kept people guessing a bit longer. I don't feel like that was the best moment for the reveal to happen. Obviously in the books it's Colin that catches her, that realises that she's Lady Whistledown, and that is how the readers realise it too. And I think that scene makes a lot more sense for character development than just this random close-up of a carriage that Penelope's inside. Also, it made me kind of not like Penelope that much as a character. In the book she is my absolute favourite, and I had really, really liked her at the start of the show, but I think revealing her as Lady Whistledown so early on makes you realise, oh my god, she's the person that essentially sold out Marina. And I do understand Penelope's feelings in that situation. I know that she loves Colin. I know that she thinks that what Marina is doing isn't moral, and to an extent it isn't. She was going to be lying to the man, but she had still, in sharing that through Lady Whistledown, essentially ruined Marina, possibly damned her and her child to a life on the streets, ruined the futures of her sisters, and further, you know, affected the reputation of her family. It was just a very selfish action, in my opinion, that kind of didn't seem very in character with the Penelope that the earlier episodes had introduced, or the Penelope that we know from the books. I do, however, have hope for her. I know she's only meant to be 17 in this series, and her book doesn't come until her character is 27, so that is a lot of growing up to do and a lot of dwelling on your own mistakes and your own actions to have time to go through. And I do think that kind of the guilt that she clearly feels when Marina attempts to abort her child and in the process risks her own life is going to affect Penelope's character later on if they come back and do more seasons. And I think for me that would definitely make her character more relatable, more likeable, if she really does own up to the wrongness of her actions and to the impact she could have had on the life of Marina and Marina's child. I feel like I'm on a run with the stuff that kind of annoyed me, so I might as well just carry on going, even though I did enjoy the show overall. I think the reason I'm nitpicking all of this stuff is because I do like the show so much and I do like the book so much that it just makes me far more critical of the things that I wish wasn't there. And one of those things in the series is queerbaiting. I don't know how much it would be qualified as queerbaiting because I don't think that the series in itself does it, but the trailer did. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's this shot in the trailer that makes it look as though Benedict is in an embrace with another man, and I know that several other people also thought that the Bridgertons were going to be diversified in terms of sexual orientation, and we were maybe going to see like a bisexual or a pansexual Benedict, which I would have really, really enjoyed. But unfortunately it is not Benedict, it is his artist friend Henry that is in a relationship with another man. I get that people were kind of annoyed that we didn't get to see Benedict embracing the bisexual life. I was a bit saddened by it. I wasn't annoyed by any means, because I do think that the conversations that he has with Henry about it are really interesting and wonderful. The speech, or kind of little mini monologue that Henry has, where he's talking about his love for Lord Weatherby and the kind of feeling of loving someone but having to disguise that love in public, I thought it was so emotional and well written, and Benedict's sympathy with it and empathy with it made me adore him as a character a lot more. So yes, it is a bit sad that we didn't get to see a queer Bridgerton, but I do think that the representation through Henry was really nicely written, and I hope that we see more of his character in future seasons. Oh, another thing that I can talk about here that I couldn't talk about in the non-spoilery section is flashbacks. So The Duke and I, the book, begins with a flashback. It begins with a kind of backstory of Simon explaining his stutter and his father's reaction to it. So I was sort of thinking, when the show didn't start with that, oh okay, they're going to reveal it to us through dialogue. So when it's slightly later episodes we started seeing these flashbacks of Simon's childhood, I was really excited that they'd kept them in, and I was also so heartbroken for Simon. I think that the little children actors that they have playing his role were so adorable and so sweet, and it was just really heartbreaking to see that level of parental emotional abuse play out on screen. It also made my respect and love and adoration and worship of Lady Danbury increase like tenfold, because she kind of has that balance where she won't take any of Simon's bullshit. She doesn't give him any concessions in life, but she also treats him with such empathy and love and understanding, and it was just a beautiful relationship that I'm really glad that they kept in and arguably developed more in the show than it is in the books. I also would have preferred it really if Simon had have told Daphne about this backstory. In the show, as in the books, she finds it out through letters and through Lady Danbury, and I feel like at that point they've communicated so poorly in their relationship that really it needed to be a conversation between the two of them. And I'm glad that they do have some really great conversations at the end where they're talking about love as a choice and loving imperfect people, but I do wish that that kind of revelation about Simon's past had come from Simon and not from other sources. I feel like by that point they really needed to be talking to each other. Yeah, I don't know, I was glad that they included it, but I definitely felt like they needed to be doing better with the communication by that point. On a radically more positive note about character relationships though, I loved Eloise and Penelope in this. In the first few books of the Bridgerton series, it is mentioned that Penelope and Eloise are very good friends, but you don't really see it until you get to their respective books. So I adored that it was so heavily emphasised from the very start of the series. They are just such wonderful characters, and their kind of sisterly bond is a beautiful, beautiful one to watch develop. I honestly found it more upsetting when Eloise and Penelope fell out than when Daphne and Simon were kind of estranged, which I think says a lot about my character preferences, but I just really adored it. I think in romance in general, sometimes friendship gets pushed aside in favour of these central romantic couples, so seeing their friendship be one of the kind of cores of this series was so wonderful, really important to me, and I just loved it. I hope they continue it with future seasons. Speaking of future seasons, which I'm still very hopeful that there will be, I don't know if you guys noticed, if you're book readers, but the foreshadowing for Antony's potential story was so subtle but so exciting for a reader. The amount of Easter eggs that they dotted in there. The ones that I noted were things like the timepiece. We know that Antony is obsessed with time. His father died very young, and Antony has got it in his head that he will not live to be older than his father was, and he's rapidly approaching that age, so he's convinced that death is kind of near for him. So having time as a concept be so linked to Antony and the symbolism surrounding his character right from the very first episode, I thought was a very clever decision. Also in the last episode, but also in the opening credits, you have the bee. The bee is a really important symbol in Antony's story. So his father Edmund died after being stung by a bee and having it invoke some sort of cardiac arrest. So the bee is a symbol that crops up again and again through Antony's book. So having that be one of the final images of the series really makes me think that if there is another season, they will be focusing more on Antony and his story and his quest to find a bride. I also loved, and this was one of the blink and miss it references, there's a bit where Gregory and Hyacinth are talking with Anthony about playing games, and he says something like, as long as you don't borrow my mallet. And if any of you guys remember the Viscount Who Loved Me, which is Anthony's book, there is a very famous scene in it where they play this game called Pummel, which is basically like croquet, and there's this running joke that Anthony has the best mallet called the Mallet of Death, and it's only his love interest that actually ends up beating him with that very mallet at the game. So the fact that they kind of brought up that, I thought was a really fun and adorable Easter egg for fans of the books, because like I said, that is a very loved scene amongst all the readers. So yeah, I think those are all the thoughts that were in my brain when I finished the series. I'm sure there will be plenty more to pop up over time as I'm awaiting the news for a potential season 2. And obviously if you guys have any opinions, any thoughts, I would love to discuss this series with you while it's still fresh in my mind, so please do leave comments down below. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye!